So we'll talk about a few things here. First, we're going to talk about pipeline types. We're going to talk about decode.and then decoderizing, which is a term I made up, and finally, intermediate representations. Okay, let's start with pipeline types. And before we get to pipeline types, we're actually going to build our way up to that by talking about just plain old decoding types, the plain old decoder primitives themselves that are going to be used in the pipeline. So let's say we have a type alias called instructor, and it's got name, which is a string, courses, which is an int, and is teaching, which is a bool. So let's say Richard, num courses 2, and active. These are the things that are we're going to be decoding from. So that's the JSON on the right, and then on the left we have the type alias that we're going to decode into. Okay? So because we've defined a record type alias, anytime we do that, we get this function for free. That is the same name as the type alias. So if I put instructor with a capital I into Elm record, just because I've defined this type alias, it's going to say, cool, that is a function from string to int to bool to instructor. Because this has 3 fields, they are defined string, int, bool in that order. So that's where the arguments come from. And if I provide all of these, then it's going to populate each of these fields in one of these records and return an instructor for me. Okay. I can decode a single field from any JSON object by using decode.field. So the way this decoder works is it takes a string for the name of the field, then it takes a decoder for the expected value associated with that field, and then it gives me back a decoder which will decode that value from the object. Important to note how decode.field works in isolation. If all I do is I run this decoder on a JSON object, all this decoder is going to do is it's going to say, I don't care what all's on that object. If that field's on there and it's got that value, we're good. Decoding succeeded. Does not care at all about the rest of the values. Doesn't care about the rest of the fields. It just cares, does it have at least that one field? And is it the type that I expect? If so, great, we'll decode it and we succeeded. This is important to note because when we start putting these things together and we start using multiple decode fields, it's important to remember that. At no point are we saying this is the exact shape of that JSON object. Essentially, it works kind of like open records in the sense of saying, I expect that at least that field is present, but there may be others, and if so, I don't really care. Okay, so that's decode.field. So we've got our instructor. We've got decode.field. And we can put these together with decode.map3. So let's say we take a look at this function and we see that it takes 3 decoders. There's also a map2 which takes 2 decoders and map which takes 1 decoder. And it takes a function from A to B to C, where A is the first decoder's type, B is the second one's type, and C is the third one's type. And that function is going to take A to B to C and return a val, and ultimately this gives us a decoder val. So using all the ingredients that we have here on the screen, we can see that if we want to make a decoder that's going to decode some fields into an instructor and end up with a decoder instructor, this is one way we can do that. We can say decode.map3, pass our function right here, which is a string to int to bool, then pass a decoder string, a decoder int, and a decoder bool, which we can use decode.field to get as the corresponding fields on the JSON object. And then, by putting all these together, we say decode.map3, instructor, field name string, field courses int, field active bool. And what map3 is going to do is it's going to run them one at a time. It's going to run this one and say, okay, did that succeed? And it says, all right, the first decoder, if it's a field name, and there is in fact a field on that JSON object called name, which happens to be a string, then it says, great, that decoder succeeded. Next one, run it again, that one succeeded, run it again, run the third one, that succeeded. Now, if all 3 of them succeeded, then it's going to say, great, I now have 3 values that I can pass to this function right here. And since what we provided for this function was instructor, it's going to say, okay, take that first one, pass it as the first argument, second one is the second argument, third one's the third argument, which is to say name, that string is going to be the first argument, which is what we want. Second one's going to be int, which is also what we want, and the third one's going to be a bool, which is also what we want. And finally, we will end up having successfully decoded this instructor. So this is how to do it using map3.